Rain lashed against the transparent alloy panels of the observation deck, turning the outside world into a blur of gray and motion. War Chieftain Kivex stood rigid, his broad carapace gleaming under the deck's sterile lights. His mandibles clicked quietly, a soft echo of controlled impatience as he surveyed the planet below. Around him stood other officers of the consortium's elite, each one draped in ceremonial sashes and high-status armor, their compound eyes fixed on the world they had long dismissed as a curiosity, Earth. For cycles, Earth had been known among the stars as a death world, a place so hostile and unforgiving that most species had considered it uninhabitable. Toxic air by galactic standards, gravity so crushing that delicate-bodied species would collapse, oceans filled with salt and monsters, jungles filled with venom and claws, and skies that dropped frozen water or hurled bolts of electricity to the ground for no reason at all. It was a world seemingly designed to break bodies and minds, and yet it was from this world that the humans had come. Kivex didn't understand the growing fascination with the species. To him, humans were frail creatures, soft-skinned, thin-boned, without natural armor or even defensive spines. No wings, no fangs, no claws to speak of. Nothing in their appearance spoke of strength or threat. And yet, rumors had spread through the consortium like solar fire, whispers of human endurance, tales of their unpredictability, their so-called courage. Kivex had dismissed such stories as exaggeration, myths crafted by bored diplomats or overeager explorers who mistook madness for bravery. But now, as part of a diplomatic exchange program, he had been sent to Earth alongside his senior officers to observe human military training. The goal was simple: to understand how these Death World natives trained for battle. Kivex expected to be unimpressed. He glanced toward Subcommander Telex, who stood beside him with his antennae twitching anxiously. The younger officer was scanning the terrain below, a wide expanse of forest and stone, carved with what appeared to be obstacle tracks, ditches, barbed wire, and walls. It was a training ground, situated on a cold, rain-drenched continent known for its mountainous terrain. Even from the observation deck, the bitter cold radiated through the floor. The Earth liaison, a quiet human male with dark-rimmed eyes, stood near a display console, saying nothing. The translator device hovered near him, blinking silently. Kivex narrowed his eyes, examining the environment. There was no shelter, no climate control, no synthetic ground padding, just mud, stone, cold wind, and rain. Conditions no sane species would train in voluntarily. His voice, deep and laced with skepticism, filled the quiet deck. This is their training facility? Primitive, exposed, inefficient. Subcommander Telex didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head as figures appeared on the edge of the field. Humanoids, moving in a loose column. Kivex leaned closer, expecting powered armor or at least some form of environmental suit. Instead, what emerged were humans in simple fabric uniforms, soaked through and clinging to their skin. Their exposed faces were red from the cold, their breath visible in the frigid air. On their backs they carried massive packs, clearly burdened with supplies or weights. Their movements weren't slow or hesitant. They were running. Kivex's mandibles parted slightly, more in confusion than alarm. Running? In these conditions? One of the humans, taller and older than the rest, stalked alongside them, shouting commands in a language the translator rendered as both angry and encouraging, an odd combination. The tones suggested dominance, but the humans obeyed without protest, increasing their pace despite the worsening weather. Telex's antennae flicked back in surprise. They train in this environment? He asked slowly, almost unable to believe what he was seeing. Without armor, without protection from the elements? Kivex remained silent, watching the humans run through ankle-deep mud. The rain had not let up. It was clear now that this was not a temporary condition. The humans had chosen to train in this. They sprinted toward a series of low wires strung across a narrow field and, without hesitation, dropped to their bellies and began crawling through the mud, their faces scraping against the dirt, their clothes tearing on stones and thorns. Kvex noticed blood on one of them. It was ignored. No medics came. The human didn't stop. The War Orc's claws flexed slightly. He had seen pain before, on battlefields, during duels, but it was always something to avoid, to recover from. Here, it seemed to be a part of the training. By design. He turned to the liaison. What is the purpose of this ritual? The human glanced at him, then at the screen, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. This is morning conditioning. The real training hasn't started yet. Kvex didn't respond. The words didn't make sense. Morning conditioning? This was madness. Deliberate exposure to injury. No symbiotic healing drones. No nutrient baths. Just physical suffering, endured in silence. And still, the humans continued, climbing walls taller than themselves, lifting each other over obstacles, crawling under barbed wire while rain beat down on their backs. There were no complaints, no slowing down. Kvex began to feel something unfamiliar rising in his thorax, a quiet unease, a question he hadn't thought to ask before. What kind of creature chose to live like this? Not just survive it, but create it? Construct these harsh environments, step into them voluntarily, and call it preparation? He looked again at the humans on the screen, their faces contorted not with misery but with grim focus. And somewhere among them, Kvex spotted something else. Grins. Laughter even. As if they were enjoying this. As if this suffering fed them, made them sharper, tougher, stronger. The idea settled heavily in Kvex's mind, disturbing the foundation of what he thought he knew. If this was their baseline training, then what would their soldiers be like in actual war? What kind of species prepares for battle not by perfecting techniques, but by embracing the chaos of failure? It was a question that would haunt him long after the rain stopped. The rain ceased for a moment, but the frigid air never stopped its biting caress. Kvex stood motionless, watching as the training escalated before him. He'd heard rumors of human resolve before, but nothing had prepared him for what unfolded. Next, the humans, drenched to the bone and covered in mud, were not slowing down. They seemed to move with a relentless purpose, an instinct to continue no matter the cost. Their commander, an older human with sharp features, shouted orders in their harsh, guttural language. A strange fire burned in his eyes, not of cruelty, but of fervor. There was something deeply unsettling about it, the way he paced along the group, eyes darting from one recruit to the next, never satisfied. His voice was a harsh rhythm, pushing them forward even when their bodies trembled from exhaustion. "Do they ever stop?" Sub-Commander Telex whispered, his antennae quivering with a mix of awe and disbelief. Kvex didn't answer at first. The truth was, the more he observed, the less he understood. The humans were not merely enduring hardship, they were embracing it. They crawled through narrow tunnels of mud, their bodies twisted uncomfortably, their arms scraped raw by jagged rocks. Yet there was no hesitation, no moment of weakness. They pushed through, some of them gritting their teeth, others speaking softly to one another as if comforting their comrades. Kvex had seen his own warriors, train under harsh conditions, but none had ever approached this level of intensity, let alone volunteered for it. There was no time for pity, no opportunity for care. Pain, injury, none of it seemed to stop them. And worse yet, it seemed to fuel them. Every cut, every bruise, every ounce of energy spent was an offering to the idea of survival. The screen changed, revealing more aspects of the humans' training. Now, the recruits were clambering up sheer walls, their hands gripping the rough surfaces with raw determination. The height of the walls seemed almost impossible for a species. So small and fragile-looking. Yet again, they did not falter. They scaled them with brutal efficiency, pulling themselves up despite the lack of tools or ropes, relying only on their strength and willpower. Kavex's mind churned as he watched, trying to understand. Was this a test of endurance? A way to force them into moments of extreme discomfort to see how they responded? He glanced again at the liaison, who stood with a faint, inscrutable smile on his face. "It is survival, War Arc. Pure and simple," he said, the translator device turning, his words into something that should have sounded ordinary, but instead came across as a profound declaration. Kavex turned back to the screen. The humans were now in a wide, open field, racing toward a low-lying trench that seemed to stretch out endlessly in front of them. Without hesitation, they leaped in, some tumbling, some landing awkwardly. Others seemed to dive in like soldiers, prepared for something far worse than just a muddy trench. They pulled themselves through the muck, hands clawing at the dirt as they submerged, only their heads visible as they made their way through the narrow, treacherous passage. Some were so covered in mud that their faces were completely unrecognizable. The War Arc's mind reeled. This wasn't just physical conditioning. This was more than preparing for battle. The humans had deliberately crafted an environment where their worst conditions, weather, injury, fear, were a daily part of their existence. They didn't train to avoid discomfort or danger. They embraced it, almost as if they were trying to bring the worst into their lives just to see if they could withstand it. The idea was maddening. It went against everything Kavex knew about warfare. His people trained for precision, for exacting victories, for perfect outcomes. They had advanced technologies that simulated battle conditions, weapons that never missed, their mark, defensive strategies that ensured survival. But these humans, they trained for chaos. They didn't prepare for perfect conditions. They didn't plan for flawless execution. They trained in the face of the unpredictable, the uncontrollable, the disastrous. Kavex's exoskeleton shuddered involuntarily. It was almost as if these humans welcomed failure, anticipating it at every turn, knowing that the worst would happen. And yet, they never stopped. Another screen flickered on, showing a fresh set of challenges. A few of the humans were carrying packs that looked far too large for their frames, struggling under the weight. They moved through an obstacle course designed to break them, crawling under low-lying beams, climbing over steel structures, their faces twisted in concentration. No one seemed to hesitate. No one paused for breath. Kavex began to understand, at least partially, what he was witnessing. This was not a force that feared loss. This was not a race to win. This was a survival test, a constant, unyielding attempt to push the body and mind beyond its limits, not to dominate an enemy, but to endure, to continue on when there was nothing left but grit. When the body screamed to stop, they did not stop. The mind said quit, but they refused to listen. This wasn't military training. It wasn't a war strategy. It was a kind of war against the self. A fight to see just how much a human could take before they broke, and even when they broke, they didn't stop. Kavex turned to the liaison officer, the human standing still with a calm expression. There was no humor in his eyes. No sign of mockery. There was only an unreadable intensity, as though he was fully aware of the depth of what was being witnessed. "What's the point of this?" Kavex finally asked, his voice hoarse with something akin to frustration. The liaison did not respond. Right away. He simply watched the humans, his gaze soft. "They're preparing for the worst, War Arc. And when the worst doesn't come, they're ready to make it through. Whatever it is, even if it kills them. Because the point is, if they survive this, they will survive anything. That's their philosophy." Kavex's mind struggled to comprehend it, but as he watched the humans crawling through the mud, climbing over obstacles, pushing past their limits with every motion, he realized something deeper. The humans weren't training for success. They weren't training for victory. They were training for survival. And in that survival, they would find a way to win. The atmosphere on the observation deck was thick with tension as Kivex's thoughts spiraled, unable to break free from the profound realization dawning upon him. The humans, those fragile, seemingly weak creatures, had revealed a terrifying strength through their unyielding willpower. Their training was not just an exercise in physical endurance, it was an entire philosophy of survival. Every grueling test they endured had one purpose: to prove that no matter what, they would continue. No matter the odds, no matter how brutal, the world or the enemy, they would find a way to press forward. Kivex's antennae twitched in irritation and disbelief, his claws flexing with a strange unease. His people had always believed in the supremacy of their tactics, their weapons, their carefully honed skills. The consortium's warriors were masters of calculated precision, fighting with knowledge, technology, and experience. They trained for perfection, for efficiency. But the humans? They didn't need perfection. They needed only to survive. This realization gnawed at Kivex. He couldn't shake the image of the humans crawling through the mud, climbing steep cliffs, or diving into freezing waters, their bodies straining and breaking with every movement. Yet they continued. Nothing seemed to deter them, not even the pain or the brutal conditions. They were relentless in a way Kivex had never witnessed before. It wasn't simply about surviving an enemy attack. It was about surviving their own pain, their own limits, and coming out stronger because of it. They seemed to thrive in the face of agony, and this unnatural ability to endure was something that even the consortium had never encountered before. The screen shifted once again, now showing a different training scenario. The humans were now in a mock combat situation, their movements sharp and precise despite the heavy fatigue that clouded their faces. They fought in pairs, each individual trying to land a blow to incapacitate the other, but with a focus that seemed more strategic than merely aggressive. They didn't just fight, they adapted, adjusting their movements mid-action, reacting instantly to the changing circumstances. Kivex's mind raced as he tried to understand what he was seeing. These were not soldiers in the traditional sense, as he knew them. They didn't rely on rigid tactics or formal training. They fought with an instinct that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, something more primal than anything he had ever witnessed. There was no hesitation in their movements, no pause for thought. It was as though they had become the fight itself, a part of the chaos they embraced. And it was in this chaos that they found their strength. The next scene shifted again, and now the humans were operating projectile weapons. Guns, rifles, things of little concern to the warriors of the consortium, who relied on energy-based weaponry. Kivex found himself leaning forward, his interest piqued. The humans handled their weapons with an intensity he had not expected. Their faces were calm, their hands steady, even as the recoil from their firearms sent shockwaves through their bodies. They did not flinch. They did not stumble. Their bodies absorbed the shock as if it were nothing, as if they had been trained to handle it from birth. Kivex was struck by the sight of it. The recoil should have been enough to disorient any normal soldier, but these humans simply readjusted, firing again and again and again with unfaltering accuracy. The War Arc was stunned. He had assumed these primitive creatures would struggle with such weaponry, that their lack of technological advancement would make them clumsy and inefficient. But instead, they were the complete opposite: efficient, precise, and relentless. It was a display of combat ability that went far beyond anything he had anticipated. The humans weren't just prepared to wield their weapons. They had incorporated their weapons into their very being, becoming extensions of themselves, seamlessly synchronized with the violence they unleashed. Then, the next part of the training unfolded on the screens. The humans were preparing for a jump from a flying craft, no safety nets, no parachutes. Just a leap into the unknown, trusting their instincts to slow their descent. Kvex could hardly believe his eyes. These fragile creatures were not only willing to risk their lives, they were eager to do so. Each one of them, without hesitation, launched themselves into the air, their bodies falling toward the ground with terrifying speed. Yet somehow they seemed completely at ease. There was no panic in their faces. There was no fear in their eyes. They fell as though gravity itself could not touch them, and as they neared the earth, their bodies twisted and adjusted, their movements precise, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. The Wararch's exoskeleton tightened as he realized the depth of what was happening. These humans were not merely testing their limits, they were becoming accustomed to the worst, mastering it, and doing so with a calm, practiced ease. It was as if they had already embraced the chaos and uncertainty of battle. The jump was just another hurdle. To overcome, another obstacle that would not break them. It only made them stronger. The realization hit Kvex with full force. The consortium had always been proud of its warriors, of the discipline and tactics they employed in battle. But the humans didn't need discipline. They didn't need advanced technology or superior strategy. They only needed their bodies and their minds, and that was terrifying. Humans were not the perfect soldiers the consortium had envisioned. They weren't machines of war, created for the sole purpose of destruction. They were something more, something dangerous. They were survivors. They didn't need to win. They only needed to keep fighting. As Kvex's mind whirled, the human liaison beside him spoke again, his voice as calm as ever. This is their approach to combat, Wararch. It's not about defeating the enemy. It's about enduring, no matter what the enemy does. Kvex's chest tightened. The liaison continued, his words almost a warning. They don't fear injury, they don't fear death. They simply move forward no matter the cost. That's why they're such a formidable force. They don't stop, not even when it's hopeless. They'll keep going, even when everything falls apart. Kvex turned his gaze back to the humans, now finishing their training, their faces tired but oddly triumphant. He understood now, perhaps more than he ever had before, that these humans had created something the consortium had never considered. Their strength was not in their weapons, their technology, or their skill. It was in their refusal to stop. They were not just training to fight, they were training to survive, to thrive in the face of disaster, and to always find a way forward. The Wararch felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. These creatures were no longer just a curiosity. They were a threat, and not in the way any warrior of the consortium could have ever predicted. The tension in the room grew unbearable as Kvex watched the humans continue their rigorous training. He could not escape the nagging feeling that something profound was happening here, something that threatened the very foundation of his beliefs. The consortium had always seen themselves as the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, superior in every way, culturally, technologically, and militarily. But now, as he observed the humans, something had begun to shift. These seemingly insignificant beings, whose very survival had once been a matter of chance, now stood at the edge of becoming something far greater than any warrior of the consortium. Kvex's antennae twitched with a mixture of fascination and dread. The human liaison, still by his side, remained quiet as the last of the human recruits completed their final task of the day. They had been put through a grueling test of endurance, strength, and survival tactics. Every human on the screen had, without fail, completed their tasks, though many of them bore the signs of exhaustion and injury. Cuts, bruises, and burns marked their bodies, yet none of them had quit. Not one had faltered. Their eyes, tired as they were, glinted with a fierce determination that no amount of pain or hardship could extinguish. Kvex marveled at the sight, yet he could not escape. The unsettling realization that their true power lay not in their strength, but in their resilience. It was as though each one of them had come to understand the value of suffering, not just as a means to an end, but as a force that could shape their very identity. Where others would break, these humans had found a way to persist. The human liaison broke the silence, his voice steady. What you are witnessing here is the core of humanity's strength, Warark. They are not simply soldiers. They are survivors. Kvex turned his gaze toward the liaison, his thoughts still tangled in confusion and awe. Survivors? He asked, his voice almost a whisper, as if the word itself might hold the answer to a question he had not yet formulated. The liaison nodded, his expression grave. Yes, they fight, not because they desire conquest or victory, but because they understand that survival is all that matters. That is their power, an unwavering will to endure, to fight through any storm, no matter how fierce, no matter how hopeless. Kvex found his thoughts racing, unable to quiet the flood of questions that surged within him. The consortium's warriors fought for glory, for honor, for the chance to dominate and conquer. The idea of fighting without a clear aim, without the goal of achieving dominance, was foreign to him. But the humans, they fought for something else, something far deeper. It wasn't just the pursuit of victory, but the simple act of continuing, of existing against all odds. The Warark's mind churned, struggling to comprehend the strange mindset these humans had developed. His species had always been motivated by pride, by the drive to outsmart their enemies, to create weapons that would strike fear into the hearts of all who opposed them. But the humans did not rely on these things. They relied on their ability to endure. This realization twisted something deep inside Kvex. For all their technological superiority, all their advanced weaponry, the consortium had never faced an enemy that could absorb the pain, the defeat, and the hopelessness of battle the way the humans did. Every time they were knocked down, they rose. Every time their bodies were pushed to the brink of collapse, they pushed back. It was as if their greatest weapon wasn't something they carried, but something they were, a deep-rooted drive to survive, to adapt, and to overcome. Kvex recalled the moment when he first encountered the humans, how they had looked so frail and fragile. They had seemed like an easy target, a species destined to be swept aside by the might of the consortium. Yet here they were, training with a tenacity that seemed impossible for such small beings. They were not afraid. They were not intimidated. In fact, they seemed to welcome the challenge, as if the hardships of war had become their very essence. He watched as the humans engaged in a series of exercises designed to test their emotional control, another crucial component of their training. Despite the excruciating pain they were subjected to, they maintained perfect focus. Their breath remained steady, their minds clear. They did not lash out in frustration or give in to panic. They simply endured, their emotions in check, their thoughts centered on their mission. Kvex realized with a jolt that their ability to suppress fear, pain, and even despair was a weapon in itself. It was a silent power, one that did not scream or shout, but rather seeped into their very being, transforming them into creatures of incredible focus and determination. This, too, was a power the consortium had never truly encountered. The ability to channel suffering, to turn it into something productive, was unlike any combat tactic the Warark had studied. As the day drew to a close, and the human recruits returned to their quarters, Kvex remained on the observation deck, lost in thought. The Warark's mind grappled with the truth that had been unfolding before him. He had come to observe these humans as a curiosity, a means of understanding their capabilities in the grand scheme of the galaxy's power struggles. But what he had seen shattered everything he had believed about warfare and strength. The humans had no need for complex strategies or overwhelming force. They didn't need weapons that could obliterate entire planets or advanced technologies that could outclass anything in the galaxy. They needed only their will to survive. The Warark's thoughts swirled in confusion. He had assumed that war was about superiority, about being the best, the strongest, the most advanced. But in the end, it wasn't the strongest that would prevail. It was the ones who were willing to keep fighting, no matter the cost. The realization was both humbling and terrifying. It was humbling because it exposed the limitations of the consortium's approach to warfare. And it was terrifying because it revealed the true strength of humanity, an unshakable will to live, to endure, and to press forward, no matter the odds. Kvex had come to study these humans, but now he found himself wondering if they had something far greater than the consortium had ever imagined: the power to survive, to adapt, and to emerge victorious not by sheer might, but by sheer willpower. The realization sent a shiver through him. The humans were not a species to be underestimated. They were a force that could not be measured by conventional standards, and that made them a force to be reckoned with. No weapon, no strategy, no tactic could ever truly predict what the humans would do next. For them, survival was not just a matter of living, it was a matter of conquering every challenge that came their way. And for the first time in Kvex's life, he began to fear that humanity might just be the galaxy's greatest threat.